Okay, hello and welcome everyone. Thank you for spending your time with us this evening. I think we have a great presentation in store for you with Dr. Lori Puterbaugh. In just a moment, I'm going to ask Lori to introduce herself, but for now, let's begin with a moment of prayer. And we're going to begin tonight with a prayer of St. Francis. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Lord, make me an instrument of your peace. Where there is hatred, let me sow love. Where there is injury, pardon. Where there is doubt, faith. Where there is despair, hope. Where there is darkness, light. And where there is sadness, joy. O divine Master, grant that I may not so much seek to be consoled as to console, to be understood as to understand, to be loved as to love. For it is in dying that we receive. It is in pardoning that we are pardoned. And it is in dying that we are born to eternal life. Amen.
Amen.
All right, I'm going to turn us over now to Dr. Lori. Lori, thank you so much for being with us. I've known Lori for years. She spoke, the first time I heard Lori speak was actually at Theology on Tap for young adults. So I think if you can speak to young adults in a bar, you can speak pretty much anywhere, even on Zoom.
And that was probably the fourth time in my life I've been in a bar. So I don't get out much. So, yeah, so I know a lot of the faces here, and it's good to see people I haven't seen since pre-COVID. I am Dr. Lori Puterbaugh. I'm a licensed mental health counselor, licensed marriage and family therapist. Did 12 years of part-time work counseling in our Catholic schools. I'm now in practice at St. Matthew Catholic Church and at Espiritu Santo Catholic Church, and also teach some online graduate classes for the University of Arizona, one of which is cultural diversity, and also am involved in some occasional service to a few of the departments in the diocese at the pastoral level, marriage and family, and vocations in particular. So that is a little bit about me. Also went through LPMI and was in the class of 2005. So, which is suddenly a long time ago. And so that's a little bit about me. And, you know, hopefully you've got the PowerPoints. I am, as I like to say, not married to the PowerPoints. The PowerPoints are kind of a jumping off spot. And my intention is to go through those. We'll have a nice long chunk of breakout session, which I am looking forward to, and then come back together after that, prior to the end of the evening, to talk a little bit more about turning discernment into action, you know, discerning action, and even the small things that we do that can start affecting change. And so it's, you know, listening across the divide. And while we, you know, there's a photo from our vacation at the Grand Canyon a long time ago, beautiful sunrise that it was. So our starting agenda for this evening is to look at what divides us, that we're designed for empathy and connection, and, you know, looking at what goes wrong, what interferes with this divine design that we are designed to connect with each other. What are the things that get in the way? The problems with disconnect that lead to disconnect, and the antidotes to those problems. And then reflection and dialogue in small groups, and then coming back together for discernment and action. And if I was going to boil that down further, maybe the way I would put it is soft heart, not overly sentimental and mushy, but not crusted over. A heart that is open to hearing the other person, hearing the other side of any situation. Respectful curiosity and listening well, and that leading to right actions, because by listening well, we learn more where our actions should be, you know, as opposed to just kind of assuming, oh, this is what I need to do, or this is what I need to say. And so that's kind of what I'm going to be going through. And I'm going to tell some stories and do a little science and do a little teaching about communication skills, which have some people who have been with me for other workshops are gonna be like, oh no, she's talking about the same thing. But it bears repeating. 20 some years of being a therapist tells me that you can say the same thing over and over, and it sometimes, every time you hear it, it's a little bit different. Okay. And I am screen sharing. So once in a while, I have to kind of figure out where I can point on my screen without making something happen to somebody in the group. So, okay. So, what divides us? And of course, there's a picture of a brand new kitty and the family's golden retriever. And they started out like this, where it was kind of like you are different and new to me. And I will tell you that prior to the my daughter's family's dog passing away unexpectedly, before the kitty was about 8 months old, they developed this wonderful teamwork in which if the refrigerator door was open, the dog would distract the human being so the kitty could jump up in the refrigerator, knock something good out, and the two of them can make a getaway with it. So clearly they figured out how to bridge their differences in a way. And I think if Kitty Chesney and Rufus could do that, I'm sure the rest of us can manage it too. But on a serious note, the things that divide us, the most blatant one in our culture is racism, ethnocentrism in general, that, sexism, ageism, political differences, religious differences, and breaking some of that open. I was recently teaching a cultural diversity class, and they were talking about, other different, various differences. And one of the students wrote this, lovely discussion in which she posited that, older people just can't handle technology, and that creates problems in the workplace because you'll text them or email them and they just don't respond right away because, they're old and they don't get technology. And it's like, well, for one thing, any technology you're using was developed by somebody who's now old. And you're assuming that people who work in the same place as you can't use the technology. Maybe they just have a different perspective. Maybe to them, the fact that you emailed them doesn't mean it's an emergency. Since the retired lady that I paint with in the park every couple of months helped develop, she was actually the head of the team for Bell Labs that developed the technology that lets our cell phone signals bounce from tower to tower to tower. So it would be a surprise to her that a young person assumed that her not responding to their text message was because she couldn't figure out how to do that. So this is just an example of how people are making assumptions. Ethnocentrism, very often we're coming from that place of the way my group does things is the right way to do it. And the people who come from that perspective, they just kind of look at everything else as, well, that's kind of weird, or that's not right, or they're doing that wrong, or instead of being curious about all the different ways something could happen. And sometimes, when this topic comes up, there's very much an us and them, as if the them is external to us. And when I was talking to different people about the fact that I'd been asked to do this, and some of the points, and exploring it with different folks, and one lady at one of the churches where I've been said, for most of these subtopics, they're right in our families. You can't get together for a family event without having some of these conflicts. And, I stepped back from that and I said, well, that's true, because in my own family, there are people who voted for Donald Trump who can't believe anyone voted for anyone else. And there are people who voted for Bernie Sanders who can't believe anyone voted for anybody else. And I just follow my mother's original advice: is don't talk with politics about with anybody in the family, because you never know what's going to happen. It just seems the most prudent thing to do. Given the fact that my brothers very famously got into a fist fight over a theological point at a funeral once. And so ever since then, there's just some things you just don't go. But even religious differences, you don't have to be a different, Eastern versus Western religions, or Catholic versus Southern Baptist. The differences might be between our pre-Vatican I Catholics and our post-Vatican V Catholics, where their interpretation of how to do things, or the way they hold their postures at Mass, or the way they dress for Mass is different, and it becomes a point of contention for somebody. You're not doing it right, therefore you must be wrong, therefore you're bad. But of all of these right now, sexism is certainly something that comes up. I hope less than it used to. I grew up in the generation where a teacher actually did point out that, it was a mistake that girls were not supposed to do better than boys in math, which was not helpful at recess later that day. Thank you very much, Mrs. Schmidt. But it's out there. But I think, racism is probably the one that brings most people here in terms of how do we address this. And I would say that the way to address it is, listening to people who hold different ideas and figuring out how to understand where they're coming from, and then taking right action. And sometimes the right action is going to be all different things, all the way down to addressing misconceptions, or addressing things that are just wrong, or maybe setting some very firm boundaries about what is and is not okay. But that's later in the seminar. And like I said, I'm not married to the PowerPoints, so hopefully you're not terribly married to the PowerPoints as well. And I work standing up, and so there's this whole taping things up on things so I can see my notes. So I want to spend, where's my little cursor? I want to spend some time talking about the way God designed us, just magnificently, wonderfully made in so many ways, that we are designed for empathy, for compassion, and for connection with other people. And this is a neurological setting, and it then from the brain goes all the way down through the whole body and vice versa. And I want to touch a little bit on this because it speaks to things that have been going on in the culture lately, and things that we're seeing happening around our world. So I'm going to start with, the fact that we have what are called mirror neurons. And so your mirror neurons are like a highway to empathy. And when somebody makes a face, like when they're telling you a story and they grimace because it was an upsetting situation, and you find yourself instinctively grimacing back, that gesture achieves two different ends. It lets the person know you're paying attention to them because they see you responding in a way that makes sense to them. But you making that echoing face triggers something in your own brain, and it triggers the emotional memories you have of that feeling that goes with that face. And so in a sense, you tap into your own grimace of discomfort or embarrassment or disgust or whatever the emotion was. So you get this little shadow flavor, this little shadow of emotion that says, this is how they're feeling, right? And so immediately at an emotional level that has nothing to do with the words, there's this sense of being understood, and this sense that I'm getting a piece of that. I'm getting a piece of that understanding. And that's so important. And then when we're listening to people, or we're observing things that are happening to people, like you might be watching things happening on the news, the emotional centers of your brain, the deep mammal and more the ones we share with all mammals, that gets woken up and feeds this sense of compassion, this concern for somebody else suffering. The anterior cingulate, another part of the higher part of the brain where the thinking happens, gets woken up. Our own memories get woken up. The vagal nerve system, which goes from the brain down in through to the belly, which is a part of the brain that you're stimulating when you do, for example, slow, deep breathing, that gets involved as well. And that triggers the whole body response. You know, somebody's telling us something upsetting, and we feel ourselves actually becoming adrenalized, or our heart starting to beat faster with upsetness. And that is our whole body setting us up to have this sense of deep connectedness to somebody else's joy, somebody else's suffering. Okay, so there's a whole bunch of things going on in the culture that interfere with this. Okay, the first one I'm going to discuss is the one that started back in the 1990s, when Botox became popular, and they were kind of overdoing it, and so people got the facial freeze. And I've actually encountered this in the therapy room, where the top half of somebody's face isn't making expressions. And I remember sitting with this one woman, and this is probably not a nice thing to say, but when I walked out to the waiting room to get her, and this was some years ago, and I knew ahead of time from talking to her on the phone that she was about my age. And I went out to get her from the waiting room, and she was sitting there in the waiting room, and she was just extraordinarily beautiful. And she had like no wrinkles. And I was like, there was a part of me that was like, oh, I'm really envious because she has no wrinkles. And you know, which was not a nice thing to say. But anyway, so we're sitting down, and she's speaking, and she's telling me this sad story about a great deal of heartache in her family. And I felt myself becoming very agitated, but it wasn't the right kind of agitation. It wasn't empathy. I was feeling distress. And I realized that my distress, my upsetness, came because her facial expression didn't go with the words coming out of her mouth. And that disparity became very disorienting for me. And I thought, I bet this is what's happening with her adult children. They're telling her things, she's telling them things, and they're not reading empathy, and they're becoming distressed. And she doesn't know, because what she sees in the mirror is you know, gorgeous. But once it starts moving, it's not telling the whole story. Well, our whole society's been, in a way, doing this in reverse by having masks, right? So we've walked around. I mean, if you cover your face right now, just cover the half of your face and look at the other people on the screen, and all of a sudden your ability to tell how they feel. Are they laughing? Are they crying? I mean, and then, you know, if we're wearing our blue light blocker glasses, and now you can't see my face very well, and the ability to start reading each other's feelings and respond to them deeply has been taken away. And we're seeing this on a grand scale in Afghanistan, where the Taliban and the government are telling women they must be covered head to foot, their faces must be covered. And so there's not a person. The shrouded figure, it no longer appears as a human being that you can have empathy or sympathy for, because the things that are designed to make us feel that way have been hidden from us, you know. And so I would say that we have this natural design for empathy, and this isn't all that gets in the way, but it's certainly, you know, some things that have been happening in the culture have made it worse. And I think when we see this kind of depersonalized violence and this terrible aggression in the news, where there's all these random attacks on people, and I wonder, to what extent does it have to do that people aren't seeing people anymore? They're not seeing a person with whom they feel a natural sense of that deep connection. It's very interesting is that the vagal nerve system, and so I'm kind of getting ahead of myself, but the vagal nerve system, that whole its sense of compassion and empathy, is also related to the capacity for humility, which is necessary if we're going to listen to people and hear things that don't go with the script in our head. Okay, and bowing stimulates that nerve and stimulates a greater sense of empathy and humility, or compassion and humility. And it's interesting that, say, in Japanese culture, in our own religious practices, in the very compelling story of both the Pharisee and the tax collector in prayer, where one is standing up and the other is bowed down, and that triggering that it's like God designed us that, even if we're being stubborn up here, he's going to make our bodies kind of try to get us where we're supposed to be. Um, that even the bowing we do in response to anything beautiful, like, if you hear a beautiful symphony played and the audience stands up, but you see that some people, it's almost like they're bowing to the stage, and that reflects that kind of humility and that openness. And people who are very powerful and arrogant don't have that design. In fact, they're not even empathetic to themselves, which is a point I'll make later, in that they'll like ignore their own physical pain, like it's disregarded, and yet that's there as a signal. So that's, God designed us. Like I said, I'm trying to figure out where my cursor went. Okay. God designed us in such a way that we are meant to connect, and we tend to go out of our way to create situations where we don't connect. So what goes wrong? Okay, so we're going to spend a lot of time here on this little slide, that we're all oblivious sometimes, and for different reasons. And so I'm going to kind of go through these problems, and look at the antidotes, and look at maybe some of the research that's out there on this, or some of the practices, and hopefully there's something in here that's useful for everybody. Okay, so the first problem is a distraction. We don't see what's right in front of us. We may be doing the Martha, 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 and not the Mary, Mary, Mary in our day-to-day life. We may be so preoccupied with what's in our head. We may be, overloaded with stimulation from devices, concerned with all of our own worries, and so overwhelmed that we're really not noticing what's happening right in front of us. Okay. And it's kind of trite to say that the antidote to that is to pay attention. But that's really like peeling an onion, isn't it? Because we may be paying attention, but not to the right things, or we may not be paying attention to the subtleties of what's going on because there's so much going on around us. I mean, until not very long ago, really not until the Industrial Revolution, and pretty late in the Industrial Revolution, people didn't live in big crowded urban areas. We lived in pretty small groups with people we knew, where there wasn't a constant drumbeat of a lot of things going on at the same time, and therefore whatever was going on could get our full attention. And acts of unkindness, acts of cruelty, acts of neglect, acts of kindness would have shown for what they are, and not been skipped over, and so starting with this kind of being more mindful and asking for that spirit of kind of gentle attentiveness to what's actually going on around me, so that I even see that other people's experience is not the same as mine. Because if I'm not noticing that, something as obvious as that, what else am I not paying attention to? The next one is kind of an ethnocentrism, and I'm putting that kind of in a big blob. And by that, I mean any kind of an attitude in which my group, my way is the right way. And so there's immediately that kind of a dualistic thought, a very simplistic, all or nothing, black and white, right or wrong kind of a thinking, where there's my way, and then there's a way that is wrong. And that becomes a problem in this connectedness, because now we have demonized everybody who's different. And of course, this is always the first step in making people hate people, right? So, I mean, the Gestapo didn't just show up one day and just start gathering Jews up off the street and send them away. First they had to have a long dialogue about how bad they were, and how evil they were, and how greedy they were, and how everything was their fault. So when they started disappearing, nobody seemed to react and think that was a problem. The demonization, the all or nothing, the, our way is the right way and your way is wrong, can hit us in a smaller way too. It's the, sometimes we talk about culture and cultural encapsulation, where a way of behaving, whether it's in a church community or a workplace or a neighborhood, is so close to the possibility that there's a different way of doing things that it's not even like they're trying to discriminate against other people. They just don't even understand that they are. And that's still a matter of being oblivious to the fact that, well, other people do things differently. I was listening to a lecture from a few years ago, actually yesterday, by Father Von Rollheiser, and he was talking about how an awful lot of Catholic, one of the things, he just kind of threw it aside because he's always throwing in things somewhere. And he's talking about how a lot of Catholics aren't very Catholic in the sense of being universal, in the sense of being accepting of and welcoming to other people. Instead, that a lot of times, like he was saying, a lot of Catholics unfortunately become very exclusionary. And we have to meet people where they are and hopefully guide them along, and hopefully they're showing us things we need to see too. But that would go into that kind of a broad category of that dualistic thinking or ethnocentrism. And I would say the antidote to that is a kind of respectful curiosity. Help me understand. Can you tell me about that? Where I grew up, it was different. And that might not be across what looks like, ethnic divisions or racial divisions as we think about it. I do a marriage prep work, some marriage prep workshops for the diocese for people who are in the remarriage program, and we spend a whole 3 hours on family of origin and another whole 3 hours on communications. You can, after tonight, you'll be like, oh, those poor people, Brian needs to stop making them do that. But he's saying no, he's not going to stop making them do that. But sometimes the example I'll use is, my husband and I are both of Northwestern European descent. We're both, we're Christians. We were raised in Christian families, and we're both the oldest in a good sized family. And when we got married, we had to figure out how to get past cultural divides because, his family never shouts. Okay, and he described the first meal he had visiting and meeting my family as having a dinner around a lot of those windsock people you see in front of used car lots. It was just like a whole lot of this and a lot of noise. And I was like, we're just normal people from New Jersey, and so the cultural differences we face can be with people who we don't think we're going to have a cultural difference with, but respectful curiosity, the curiosity that invites, not treating like somebody like they're an oddity, but just kind of saying, this is not, something, this is something new to me, or could you help me understand that better? Is something I think can push past that ethnocentrism and open us up. Now, the next piece maybe should have been the second piece, is resistance to other people's pain. And I would say that this comes from two different places. And I think it's a thing that's worth reflecting on ourselves privately, because no doubt each of us has things that could fall into two different categories. The easiest one, I think, to explain is simply the person who has no frame of reference, and that you're having a problem with something, or you're having a difficulty with something, or something is painful for you, is completely alien to them, to the point where they don't open themselves up to consider that maybe it's not always that way. Okay, and I'll give you a family example that obviously doesn't have anything to do with racism, which is and bias in that sense, which is our overarching, but maybe it'd be helpful. My father came here at 8 years old to this country as a refugee, the family having escaped from Eastern Europe after World War II. And in spite of being an 8-year-old who could speak German and nothing else, because he had the magic 3 traits for boys of being, athletic, funny, and cute, had no popularity problems whatsoever. It's like he had the magic ticket, and for him, making friends was easy, and he hit the ground running in this country and never was bullied once in his life in this country. And he's the father of 7, and 2 of us, me and my baby sister, who are 18 years apart, we're not blessed in those ways. We were both kind of like the plain smart girl going through school and got bullied a lot. And my dad loved us and would do anything for us, but he could not understand why we didn't just do something about this. I mean, why can't you just do something about this? And it was like, well, one of the big kids holds my arms together behind my back and the other one hits me at recess, and there's really not a whole lot I can do. And he just was like, if you just had the right attitude, this wouldn't happen. And it's just like, I know my dad loves me, but he doesn't seem to understand this. And I think a lot of times when we're looking at the big problems of society, when people are facing just the endless day-to-day, sometimes big and sometimes just over and over and over, insults of racism, or ethnic slurs, or snide comments. A friend of mine who's of Indian subcontinent extraction, is a professional and in a hospital setting, and she gets in an elevator, and somebody else in the elevator with her, when they step out, makes a remark about it smells like curry. A little snide remark over their shoulder. I mean, just horrible. I mean, she shared that with me, and I was just like, this happens, right? I can't imagine what that is like. I hope I was empathetic when I heard it, because it kind of took my breath away. It's like, whoa, that's, and if there are people who get these kinds of things all day, right? All day, every day, the little slurs, the little insults, and what a terrible burden that is. The other part of the resistance to others' pain, and this is a tougher one, is people who don't have compassion for their own pain and deny their own pain, who have developed a crust over the wounds they've had. They're not going to be open to other people's pain either. They're going to put up a wall against it. They're going to minimize it. They're going to deny it. They're going to pretend to be oblivious to it. Because there's a difference between a crust and a scar. I mean, I've got some good scars, and unless unless you get keloids like my mom does, scar tissue tends to be thinner than everything else, right? It's like it doesn't really come up flat to the rest of the skin, except when it's having a bad day and it decides to be puffy. But our scars, in a way, from an emotional standpoint, is a sign of healing, but a little bit of vulnerability. And when we haven't developed a scar and we instead have an emotional crustedness, we're keeping our softness for other people to not possible. It's not possible to be soft-hearted towards other people's suffering when we're crusted up against our own suffering and we haven't healed from that. And so I would say that sometimes, when like it's like that trite saying that hurt people, but hurt people who haven't dealt with the fact that they've been hurt and healed and done some healing work are going to have a great lack of capacity for compassion for other people. And, I think, if you've been alive and you've loved people and you've taken risks in life, you've gotten lots and lots of opportunities to be hurt. And if there's pieces of that haven't been addressed and healed in a healthy way, in which it's been integrated into who we are and how we make sense of things, it's going to be that barrier to other people. And so that acknowledgement and taking the time and the effort and introspect of healing our own emotional wounds so that we're freed up to be open to other people's woundedness, right? Because until that happens, we're blocking ourselves from the capacity to hear what other people are saying. Is that making sense? Anybody, I have a chat thing open. So if somebody wanted to like, Lori, you're not making any sense, or could you explain that a little bit more? Just, type that in there and I'll try to keep an eye on that too. The next thing on the list is the life is math. Okay. And there's two different versions of this, right? So one of them is thanks, Jerry. Life is math, as in there's one right answer. It's like I'm always telling clients, for the most part, life is not arithmetic. What should I do when my kid doesn't want to eat their vegetables? Well, there's lots of right answers. Okay. There's also a lot of wrong answers. Having a 4-hour stare down over the vegetables is the wrong answer. I can tell you that. But, purpose, serving it to them again for breakfast is the wrong answer. I can tell you that. But there's a lot of possible right answers. And people like the easy sureness of having a right answer. And if they can figure out something that makes sense to them as a right answer, they will cling to that. And that's one version of the life is math. The other version of the life is math is this kind of like winners, losers, zero sum. If I'm doing well in whatever version of the world's wellness we're talking about that moment, and somebody isn't doing well as well in whatever measure we're talking about, then it becomes a math problem. Did I take something away from them? If somebody else has a gift or a talent that I don't have, am I somehow cheated because I'm not as good of a sculptor or a writer or a teacher, or it doesn't take anything away from me. Am I taking something away from them? Or if they try to get better, if somebody else tries to become a better therapist than they are, is that going to threaten me? So I think these two versions of life as math can get in the way of being able to listen to other people's perspective. And moving from that to life is love. I mean, love is supposed to be the guiding principle, and not love in, necessarily a mushy kind of a way. Because that's frankly, there's people who are kind of hard to be like mushy about, but you can want what is best for them. You can want and will the best for them as God sees it, even if you don't think they're particularly like a nice person, or you think like, you're a good person, but they're painful to be around for some reason. Or, you really like, you're sure they're a very nice person, but whatever, something about them annoys you. So, because they remind you of somebody you don't like. So you can still find love for them. There's still that love component of, I want the best for them. I want what's best for them in their life, in God's will for them. And that doesn't cost me anything. It doesn't take anything away from me. And in fact, the more mature we get, the more we're supposed to be open up to rejoicing that other people are doing well, that other people are thriving, that we don't have to be envious or feel like we're being bamboozled if things go well for them. And so acknowledging the primacy of love, I think, is an antidote to that life is math. There's one right answer, and if somebody else gets more, then I'm getting less. Okay. Defensiveness is the last thing on the list, and that'll bring us to a big, long Lori talking about communication skills thing. I think defensiveness, when people are bringing up a problem, racism, discrimination, the mistreatment of a group of people, the migrant farm workers in Plant City, African-American families that are just trapped in some of the scariest parts of South St. Pete, where I worked for a while, and my daughter then later as a social worker worked there as well. Defensiveness comes up, and I think there's a number of different pieces of this, and maybe these are things that can be in mind when we're talking to other people later and trying to have dialogues on how to address problems. I think one thing that comes up is a fear that if we acknowledge a problem exists, that somehow we're going to be blamed. You know, if as like for example, somebody might think, well, as a member of the majority, whatever the majority is, and in this country, the majority of people are light skinned, or I guess European background. I think there are for some people a fear that if I acknowledge that racism still exists, that somehow it's going to be turned around and I'll be blamed because I'm a member of this dominant group. And so I think there's a fear of getting schmutz on them. I don't know, for lack of a better word. Defensiveness that we might have about somebody else having a different perspective about something is that they mean bad by it, that they somehow there's some kind of a bad intention in the way people are behaving or the way what they're working on. Not wanting to get blamed, again, not wanting to be looked at as part of the problem when we don't feel like we are part of the problem, or like we haven't historically been part of the problem, so it gets in the way of hearing. And so then it comes to the yes, I hear you. And so one of the handouts that there's like a 2-page Word document that went out that was like, oh, everyone's like, oh no, there's like tons of stuff on here. The second page of it is a handout on listening. You don't need to look at it right now, but it might be useful reference later, or maybe you just jot down some notes. And I use the acronym ARRACE. I don't know why, but for eye contact, reflecting, asking questions, showing support, and empathizing, encouraging, an E word like that. And so I'm going to go through them, and I'm going to try to break them open quite a bit. And then from that, I believe we kind of will in short order be going into breakout sessions. So I'm keeping an eye on the time, because when you're the talker and you're screen sharing, you can't see a clock. So I have to keep looking at my clock here to see what time it is. The first is eye contact, which is really a way of saying, give somebody your full attention, whatever that might mean. Optimally, you're able to be face to face and look at them in, the social triangle, so that, you're giving them their attention, their respectful attention. Reflecting, and there's 3 layers of reflecting, and we're familiar with these from day-to-day life, right? So the first layer is reflecting back to make sure I've got the facts right. So somebody says, hey, I'm going to the store, do you need anything? And you say, yes, could you pick up milk and a bag of apples? And they say, okay, got it, milk and apples. Okay, they're just reflecting back the content, so they heard what you said, they got it. That's easy peasy. Okay, the next level is reflecting in such a way that the person knows that you're trying to understand how they feel. Okay. And that's important, because if people don't think you understand and care how they feel when it's something that's significant to them, they don't really care what your solutions are or your recommendations are. Right. If you can watch that little humorous video online sometime. It takes about 2 minutes, called it's not about the nail, which kind of summarizes the whole in a humorous way. But the truth of it is, if people don't think you hear what they say and start care and understand how they're feeling, they're not interested in what your solutions are. So, if you're good with vocabulary words for feelings, that's great. If you're not, There's a thing online developed by Dr. Gloria Wilcox called the feeling wheel, which now everybody has on posters, and you can download an image. I've had plenty of clients who downloaded an image of it as a cheat sheet to keep on their phone. So like when somebody was talking to them, especially like a spouse, they could be like, it sounds like you're feeling frustrated. And their spouse would be like, yes, you understand. You're wonderful. You're such a good listener, but it is important. The next level, and this is the level of feedback and reflection that tells somebody we care about and we understand why whatever they're telling us about is significant to them. Okay. And it's the reflection of what this must mean to them. If a friend gets a scholarship and another student who applied for the same scholarship makes a remark about them getting that scholarship because of the color of their skin, because they're a minority. Of course, that's hurtful. And of course, that's aggravating and it's unfair. And it also, to the person telling you that story, there may be deeper meanings like, is this what I'm going to have to put up with my whole life? Is everyone going to look at everything I achieved with hard work and God's gifts as something that's being given to me like some kind of a consolation prize? The insult, the fear, that might be going forward into the future. Is this what it's going to be? And if your feedback can touch that, the person can feel more deeply understood than if you say, well, that person's a jerk. Don't pay attention to what they said. Well, that's a supportive level of feedback, but it doesn't get to the heart of the matter, which is this deep wound that says, am I ever going to be taken seriously? Am I going to be fighting uphill like this my whole life? Am I like Sisyphus pushing this up the hill and having it crush me over and over? Okay. The next part of communication is asking questions. And I encourage people to ask questions. I encourage people not to ask why, because why makes us defensive. And this is the Lori Puterbaugh theory of that. Quick and easy. I don't have any data for this, obviously, but this is my theory. My theory is when you're 2 years old, you're 1/2 the height and 1/4 the weight of the adult you. Okay. And that is exactly when grown-ups start asking why. And it's usually why by a very angry giant, twice your height and 4 times your weight, waving their arms around and asking you why there's purple crayon on the wall, why your teddy bear is in the toilet. Anything. Why has to do with an angry giant, and it's scary, and you get an adrenaline response, right? Giant walks in. If an 11-foot tall person walks in this door right now and starts yelling at me, I'm going to get an adrenaline rush that will lock that memory in. And a pre-verbal child locks that memory in, right? Why? Angry giant. I'm in trouble. And it's my theory that if somebody important to us or somebody more powerful than us for the rest of our life says why, that little comes up, and we immediately feel like we have to defend ourselves because we're in trouble because the teddy bear is in the toilet. Okay. And so don't ask why. Ask, help me understand. Could you tell me some more? That sounds really frustrating. What happened next? What were you hoping would happen? All kinds of sneaky Pete ways to get around to the why without stepping on that adrenaline gas pedal that it can be for us. And then it's the showing support, encouragement, empathy, and obviously these steps can be repeat as needed. It might be you do some reflection, they say something else, you ask a question, you show a reflection, they say something else. It's fluid, but I think those are the components of good listening. Okay, and that brings us to a kind of a I hear you. Okay. And so, listening to ourselves, listening to other people real quick before we go into breakout, because I've talked for too long. you know, that humility. I don't know about what their experience is like, but I have my own experiences of being less than. I'll use a real quick example of less than that. I think, you know, if we're fortunate enough to live long enough, we get to have this experience. Okay. And so I'll do for women, it usually happens earlier, especially if you have a daughter. You walk in a room with your daughter and you realize that you are not the alpha female in the room. Okay. You realize that people are gazing on the gaze of approval from men and the gaze of assessment from women falls on your child. And you know, no matter how much, you know, what affirming you get from other people, that you've slipped socially, even though nobody else there saw that there is a change. I think for men, maybe an example would be, and this is what I've heard from people, you know, you're doing what you always do, and you're checking out at the Ace Hardware or wherever it is, and you're just joking around with the pretty girl who's the cashier, and she smiles at you. And it's the first time you realize you're not getting the flirty smile, you're not getting the sincere friend smile, you're not even getting that kind of a shy smile that women can have sometimes in the presence of males. You're getting the patronizing young woman to the grandpa telling a grandpa joke. And you have slipped. And in your heart, you feel ashamed. You feel like, has this happened before? Did anybody see that? You know you've had a slip in the social setting, right? That you are no longer being seen as a man first. And it's like, well, what just happened here? I'm not different. Why is the world treating me different? And these kinds of little, what feel like little superficial things, because they're so mundane and they happen to everybody. Like I said, if you're lucky enough to live long enough, you have these kinds of experiences. But it can give you enough of that shadow to have that mirror empathy, if that makes sense. That, yeah, I don't know what it feels like to have somebody make a remark like it smells like curry over their shoulder at me as they leave an elevator. But when they tell me that, I know I've had enough experiences of being less than that can help me tie into what this horrible thing my friend went through of being demeaned at the workplace. And then from that, we can, you know, move to being open to addressing the issues of unfairness and injustice. I think from a place of deeper understanding and empathy for our brothers and sisters who are experiencing things far different than we might be. And I think that brings us to reflection group time, right? Yes, Sabrina. Okay, so, you know, I hope those were good breakout sessions. Mine was good, and it was nice to be quiet and not be in charge of talking. And I want to just throw out some possible suggestions, and then hopefully there's some discussion about how to, as I say the next time, you know, stir up the waters. You know, we have to, you know, first of all, just not give quiet, silent assent to what's wrong in our presence. Whatever it's an offhand remark or a joke or some kind of a behavior, I think it's very important to just, you know, if nothing else, to respond with quiet confidence that something isn't okay. We can certainly invite discussion, but not with a why question. Setting our own boundaries, what is and is not. I think witnessing a discriminatory act. I mean, some of the first things that came to me in terms of small actions, and these are very small, but at the micro level, to defer your place. You know, sometimes you'll see somehow or other, like there's 5 people and clearly there's a line, and somehow the person who's doing the serving of some kind or meeting people's needs skips, you know, and it looks like a discriminatory thing. And I think in those places, you know, you can defer your own place. You can step back from that. You can leave and explain why to somebody who's in a management type of position, report to management what you've seen, what you've heard, what your observations were. These sound very small, but it makes a difference to somebody. And sometimes the situations in which we find ourselves are ones in which only our small actions are what's going to be happening. And so there's that kind of, I think I'm stealing a Sabrina phrase when I say something about quiet confidence in the moment of, this is not okay. I see things differently. I think when we were talking about kind of bouncing ideas around when Sabrina first approached me about this, and she said, well, I see things differently. For example, when people are saying something, or that's not the way I understand it, or sometimes I'll say to people, well, I really haven't heard about that. Could you explain this to me? And sometimes that'll bring up kind of a dialogue, and it gives you an opportunity to kind of hook in and do that good listening and ask the kinds of questions that invite people to even look at their own thinking process. Because a really good dialogue leaves you thinking more about how you were thinking than when you went in. It isn't just a back and forth of tennis, ba-boom, ba-boom. I see things in the chat. I just want to make sure I'm not missing any questions. No, I'm not. Okay. I am not good at talking and trying to do things on a screen at the same time. So, no one, anybody who ever is talking to me and in a Zoom thing and wondering if I'm multitasking, clearly I'm not, because I can't even move the chat room without freezing.
Well, I can pay attention to the chat for you and maybe read anything that pops up there. And I'll just say, Lori, I really like what you said about scar tissue.
Oh, thank you.
I just found that really profound about it. I jotted it down about it being thinner and a sign of healing, but also a sign of vulnerability. I thought that really stood out to me.
Well, thank you. Thanks. I
Maybe
hope it makes all of us go home and look in the mirror and look at our scars with more compassion too, right? The physical ones and the emotional ones. Stirring up the waters. Anybody here who watches the series The Chosen, remembers when Jesus says, sometimes you got to stir up the waters, And we're looking at systemic injustice. It's going to be bigger things. It's going to be speaking, questioning, setting our own boundaries, refusing to participate. And that comes at a cost. If you're looking at refusing to participate in something that seems corrupt, that can cost you your professional reputation, or cost you some income, or cost you friendships or family relationships. And that becomes, I think, scary for people, but it's a great challenge of discernment to figure out how we are called to act. And hopefully there's been some tools in here that are useful. And in this last bit of time that we have, somehow I managed to go backwards for the first time tonight. Okay. If there's any comments or questions or discussion or something somebody could add into this, that would be very welcome for me. Thank you.
Let's see, we have a couple of folks that have to leave. So if you can pop a question in, or just something that came out of your group that you heard, something that you shared that you thought was might be helpful for others as well. I didn't get to participate in a group, but had conversation recently about folks, and you think someone, and then you're having a glass of wine, you're cooking dinner, you have friends over, and all of a sudden something is said that you need to address, but like I'm just not good at thinking quickly on my feet. Like later on, I think of 5 things I could have said, but in that moment, I find myself just kind of stunned and like, not wanting to say the wrong thing. It's so hard. I don't know. Where do you go with that?
I think that it's a very normal thing to kind of think about it and be like, well, what do I want to do next time? What could I say next time I encounter something like this? And if it's making sense to follow up on it, if that, if it's a significant relationship where you might be, I was thinking about our conversation the other day, and I wasn't sure if I heard this right, or I think I might have misunderstood. You know, if it, I mean, sometimes it might not be worth bringing up. You know, my grandmother, rest her soul, could never understand why my daughter and my baby sister went to college and didn't come back married. You know, it's like, she was like, why did they go to college if they weren't going to come back with a husband? And it wasn't wasn't a conversation worth having with somebody who was 90 years old. It was, well, they haven't gotten one yet, but
Yeah.
you know, anytime, you know, but
Could I say something? Hi. Hi. Okay. This has been quite a year for everybody, I think. Where I sit, I am right in the middle between all the people that I work with that are doing such good work, and 5 counties, and the people who we serve, and people who we don't serve but call in anyway, and you know, and either say something nice or not. And so I'd really like to have this, and thank you very much for being here, Lori Puterbaugh, to do this, because I sure need this. The vision that we've got is not just interpersonal. I know, although it starts there, it's that it's going into our educational system now, and it's going into people's personal lives, as far as not I don't know what I don't know whether to call it willful misunderstanding or what to call it, but that is part of what's going on too. And to have politics and religion being off the table is very detrimental, when those are exactly the things that are happening. And I think that when we spend so much time getting our opinions from big media, and although they're not to blame, they have corporate owners who want to make money on our divisions. And so if we can understand some of that as to what is making us be divisive, maybe we can start to talk to each other and say exactly what we're trying to do. When people say that we shouldn't teach our children about racial division in schools, I don't know how we're supposed to come up against that in our families if even the schools aren't going to reinforce us in trying not to have division. So I think we have to start teaching, and this isn't an original idea of mine by any chance, it's just something that I read, that we start to talk among ourselves about good ways of countering all of this. And read some great books, such as this one. Can you see that? I don't know if you can see that or not. That's the 1619 Project. 1619 Project. And it should be taught in schools, because so much of this is just everything that we do, and all of our laws, and everything that we can't even imagine until you read this, how things actually got started in this country. And I realize that I'm getting all soapboxy here, and I'm very sorry.
No, but you know, if I could, I'm being respectful of the time. And I think what Nancy is really underscoring is how, in a way, somebody that Dale's breakout room, we mentioned that any of these subtopics could be an entire dinner conversation for a handful of people. And so maybe what happens from here is the people that are in this group, and the people they know, have these conversations, and maybe there's been something tonight that's been a little bit useful in terms of a way to invite dialogue, so people's defenses are lower, and there's that possibility of compassion and understanding for a different perspective. And Nancy's really kind of underscoring that with exclamation points for us at the end of the talk. So thank you, Nancy.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you, Lori. Thank you, Nancy. Do we have time to sneak in one more question, Lori?
That's up to you. Yeah.
Well, I've seen that Jim has had his hand raised, so I'm going to give him the.
I don't necessarily need to raise a question, but I mean, I'll just make an observation, and if someone wants to comment, they're welcome to. Well, first of all, thank you very much, Lori, for this wonderful presentation.
Thank
I
you.
enjoyed our breakout rooms as well. One thing that I've been thinking about while listening to you and the people in the small groups is that it's especially difficult to practice sort of this empathetic listening and you know, repeating back what you've heard people say and acknowledging their perspective when you're in contexts where there is division. Because sometimes if you listen empathetically to one perspective, and then you do so with the other perspective, the two sides kind of think that you're doing an injustice by listening to the other side. And I mean, I guess I reflect on that through the role that I had in my department as a chairperson. And I think good chairpersons are people who listen to the different perspectives. But the challenge I often found myself in was that when different factions want not only for you to listen, but to adopt their side without trying to bring a compromise, you're put in sort of like in between a rock and a hard place. Right. It's hard to know exactly how to respond in some situations like that.
That's a whole separate hour. But you know, in this is I do marriage counseling. So half my time is marriage counseling and half is individual. And very often, and perhaps this is the case in a lot of situations, if you can find some remnant of rightness on each side, it doesn't mean you're completely agreeing, but if you can acknowledge that that both sides have some valid point, however slim it might be in some cases, there's some place where the dignity of the person and their experience can be acknowledged without buying the whole package.
Yeah, right.
If that makes sense. And
yeah.
maybe that's a way to leave that for this. So
yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Well, Dr. Lori, thank you so much for your time. Yeah, the wisdom that you've shared with us tonight has been great. You've given us a lot to think about. This particular workshop is sponsored by our Diocesan Racial Harmony Committee. Many of you participated a little over a month ago in a workshop that was sponsored by our Diocesan Civil Dialogue Committee. You might be thinking that we're running on parallel tracks here, and we really are, because we're really trying in our diocese to raise a level of consciousness about civil dialogue and to give people the tools to do that. So we'll send you this recording in a few days, and we ask that you listen to it again, continue to ponder some of this wisdom that Dr. Lori has shared with us. But also we ask that you share it widely with friends, family, colleagues, share it on social media, because we really think that this is so important that the word get out there, that we teach people how to have these quality conversations and really truly listen to one another. So again, thank you to our committee for helping to put all of this together. Thank you to Dr. Lori for being here tonight, and thank you for your time. We just wish your blessings upon all of you. Have a wonderful night, and I'll ask that our committee stay online for a couple of minutes to do a quick evaluation.
Thanks so much. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sabrina, do you need anything else?